Very good evening to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you so much for taking the time out to attend this webinar. So I think we can begin. There already is a great turnout. So just goes to show how everybody is thinking about impact measurement, management, monitoring, evaluation, accountability, learning, all these big words. Um, so, yes, welcome to all of you who've taken, and thank you for all of you who've taken the time out to be part of this discussion today. I'm Sharon Weir, and I'm one of the co founders at Fourth Wheel, a research and consulting organization focused on institutionalizing monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning, which basically means let's move beyond beyond these one-time commissioned impact studies to actually embedding it in the core operation of our work. So that's me. I have take great pleasure in introducing Trisha, who I guess I'll call upon to introduce herself, but who represents ISDM. And we've been working together for the last year trying to figure these things out. So very happy to have you, Trisha, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you so much for having me here, and welcome everyone. Really excited to see the turnout. It's a really large turnout. Um, my name is Trisha Varma, and I lead the Global Knowledge Hub at the Indian School of Development Management. The Indian School of Development Management, or ISDM as we call it, is an institution which is dedicated to the practice and creation of a discipline which is development management, which is introducing management principles into the social sector or into the development sector, knowing that management principles for the development sector will look very different from traditional management, which could be business management, it could even be public administration kind of management. So the institution is dedicated to that. And the Global Knowledge Hub is one of the verticals within ISDM, where we focus on the creation of knowledge and application of that knowledge around development management. Maybe a very quick 1 minute background to this particular study, impact or illusion, that we will be talking about today. So Sharon, as you said, it's I think actually more than a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago that we started.
I've stopped counting actually, but yes.
That we started conceptualizing this work, yes. But where it started from was we have a Center for Innovative Finance and Social Impact within the Global Knowledge Hub. And one of the areas of work in CIFC is around impact, social change, understanding what is social impact, social change, how do we evaluate, assess it, how do we ensure that there is sustainable social impact and change, and all the players in the ecosystem are kind of bought in on the same language, the same understanding of what this is. And the way we wanted to kick this off was firstly to go in with this notion that we don't know it all, even though there have been folks who've been in the sector for a very long time and obviously have a lot of understanding, experience, and a lot of opinions, on what social change and social impact means. But we really wanted to kind of hear it from the perspective of the social purpose organizations which are working on driving social impact and social change on the ground. So this was an exploratory landscape study. We were open to anything that came out of this work. And if you remember, we had a lot of conversations on what anything means and how do we ensure that we remain unbiased and completely open to it. And as I said, the intention was largely to understand what is the perspective of organizations on the ground. How do they think about impact? What is their definition of social impact? Not, how do they measure it or how do they look at an impact assessment framework, but really how do they think about change? And what are the challenges and barriers that they face in looking at social impact? So that was the background to this study.
Thank you so much, Trisha. And I think it sets some context for what I'm going to be sharing with the group today. So thank you very much. And let's jump right in. But before we kind of deep dive, I just wanted to set some agenda for what we'd be looking at. Really quickly, what we were, just talking about is a little bit of introductions. I also want to talk about, what you can expect from this session. One is we urge all of you to read the report, consume the report, get in touch with, the SIFC team, the fourth wheel team, to really share insights on what you all think, and if there is any sort of new sort of thinking, new ideas, new frameworks, something that's done differently. We're very interested in keeping this conversation open. And that's the purpose of today's discussion. However, for those of you who have been part of some of Fourth Wheel's webinars and workshops, for us, it's really important that if you'll spend an hour with us, you should take back some new idea, a solution, or the ideal piece would be to take back some action to your organization. So that's what we would hope to achieve today, for all of you to take back some new ideas and solutions and actions in your work. Um, I'll be spending a little bit of time to really talk about some of the findings of the report. What did it tell us? But more importantly, what should we do about it? What are these solutions for addressing gaps? Which again, I'll have the privilege to have Trisha with us today to really talk us through these ideas and solutions. And then we'd like to keep it very open to questions, to deliberation, to dialogue. So we've left a little bit of space for, to hear from all of you who've joined us today. And then really chalk out some sort of a way forward. And I'm sure that will emerge from the discussions we have. So that's an overview of this 1 hour together. Just a few housekeeping rules. We really want to keep it interactive. We want to hear your thoughts. I have to say personally, I go back to all the chats and really look at what kind of solutions came up, what questions came up, and how we can work around this dialogue that is generated. In the Q&A session, please feel free to, of course, use the chat box, but raise your hand, kind of speak up, and we'll unmute you. Since it's a webinar format, it's a little difficult to keep everyone's audio on, but let that not restrict you from participating. So that's it from the housekeeping piece, and I want to dive right into the study and the overall findings. So I think one big question when we started this study was to ask the question that, like Trisha rightly mentioned, what do we understand as social impact? Is it about reaching, if it's a women, empowerment program or a women skilling program to make small business enterprises for women? How do social purpose organizations, how do NGOs, SPOs actually, determine what is that change they want? So is it, making businesses or making small micro enterprises for women? Is it about increasing the income they earn from that? Is it about creating empowerment? So we really went in to understand not what's being measured, like Trisha said, but how are NGOs articulating impact? And we didn't just go in and talk to leadership. I think something we spoke to 25 organizations, as you will see on the screen, but we spoke to different people within the organization. So we spoke to leadership, to founders, to directors, to CEOs of these SPOs. We spoke to middle management, program teams, um, and people who kind of are more looking at, what tools are being used, what design is being done. And then we actually spoke to people who are on the ground implementing programs. So we did know, we took a very sort of overarching approach or a very holistic approach to get this insight from different, different people within an organization. We also spoke to experts. Again, we went in with this idea that, it's not theory of change or log frame or, a systems framework. We wanted to understand what are the different ways that, this impact is being articulated and what frameworks are they using, right? So I think that was what we wanted to understand. So one was, yes, of course, to understand, how our SPOs articulating social impact. What does social change mean? And then we actually went in to see, okay, if SPOs are saying they want to measure empowerment, are they able to capture that? Are their current tools, methods, frameworks able to capture this concept of empowerment, or however else they articulate social impact? So that was the broad purpose. Today, what we're going to be doing is looking at these two questions. One is, how do they define social impact, or at least share with you what we learned from it? And then is to look at how do they measure social impact. So very interestingly, and I've been in the space for, about 15 years, and I have seen this evolution, and it is so interesting. Earlier we would see, they would say, I mean, SPOs would articulate social change by saying, we want to increase the water table, or we want to harvest so much water. And it was very activity focused. A lot of work was very focused on delivery, and everything was articulated like that, like we will reach so many people, we will ensure this infrastructure is built. But so interestingly, this time we found everybody is saying that we need systemic change. By just working with a girl in a vulnerable community to get her to school and improve her learning, get her academic support, is not going to work if we don't look at her family, if we don't look at the community she comes from, if we don't look at the teachers that support her. So there was this whole change in saying it's not the activity, it is this ecosystem we want to work on, which is a huge change from how development was viewed a couple of years ago. The second piece was everybody at different, and if you see the slide before, we had representation from different kinds of organization: education, health, water, sanitation. But everybody had this cross-cutting theme of women empowerment. And there was also a cross cutting theme of how they defined it was no longer, I want to raise income or I want to improve skills. It was about community empowerment, resilience. So, very interestingly, there's a shift in how organizations are defining social change from activity based, program based, to this more holistic approach of social change. And then we went, so the actual question we asked everybody was, what is social impact for you, for the work you do? And these are the different things that came up, the most common things. And so, very naturally, what they said as to how they do this, not too many spoke of programs, but they said, we do government collaborations. We are trying to work within the system. We are looking at empowering different kinds of stakeholders within the ecosystem. We are trying to look at content driven approaches, which is again, quite different. Otherwise, you would say, oh, I do a livelihood program, I train youth, or I do a health program, I have medical vans. That's not how SPOs defined social impact. But on the flip side, when we started asking them, okay, how do you measure this? Then it's all comes down to programs, right? Then all the indicators look at how many meetings did they attend, or how many are now for women empowerment, how many are now in the local panchayat, or if we looked at community empowerment, it boiled down to how many have got how many government schemes. So for us, the big learning from this study was that while we have come a long way to how we view social impact in such a holistic, systems strengthening way, the out indicators or the outcomes that we then look at are very short term in nature, which is great because it builds perspective, but probably does not answer the question of we want to do systemic change or we want to do system strengthening, but we are not able to collect data on that. And that was a big finding for us from this study. We didn't stop there. We said, okay, it is, we see this disconnect. Why is that happening? So we had a lot of conversations with people, implementation teams, leadership, management. Like, why do you think that's happening? And experts as well. So the first thing, it came down to the idea that the way we are creating our log frames or our theory of change, etc., is very focused on doing it because the donor is asking us to, not because we are actually holding ourselves accountable for it. So I think one was, donor demands that I want to see how many people you reached or immediate results. And, it's difficult, for example, if you want to see learning outcomes, to see that in 3 months. Or it's difficult to say, I have built community mindset or attitude. So this, even though we have that vision, it becomes difficult to navigate with our donors who are asking for these immediate results. Again, big sort of learning for us, and I think would resonate with all of you, is it's very easy to look at, I used to earn 10,000 rupees before as a participant in a program, and now I earn 15,000 rupees. Very easy. But what happened, like, these intangible impacts about empowerment, resilience, what did I do with that money, becomes very difficult to kind of, track, trace, or even measure. Again, lots of times grants and funds are given for very short timelines. So if I'm trying to look at women empowerment, which is a long term process, I have only so much time. So that was another reason why, our indicators look the way they do. And sometimes, also this whole standardized KPIs. If you're doing a skill program, measure these. If you're looking at education, measure these without much linkage to what program you're doing. Can you act, is it actually, smart? Is it specific? Is it measurable? Can you achieve that through your program? Is it time bound? So I think this whole idea of, everyone using the same thing without it being contextualized is was seen as a major challenge. However, one thing that kind of, so these were like our, big broad findings. Thank you, Kritika. Kritika has just shared the report, and there are lots of examples. There's lots of quotes for you all to kind of consume the content and reflect on. Do you agree to these? And then, as a community, together as the sector, try and find solutions to these. Um, we kind of bucketed all these challenges into three broad areas, which is methodological barriers, right? So, what we just spoke about, how do you define indicators for empowerment? What are the tools that exist, which is context specific, to an African context, or to an Indian context? And when I say that, even, one village to another in India, and I know for a fact in different contexts in the world is so different. So, what tools do you use? What methods do you use? This is kind of a big piece when we look at managing and measuring impact. Then this whole piece of ecosystem barriers, which is, capacity, having like the whole organization think about impact in a similar way, having the funding, having the resources, is another big barrier. I just want to spend one more minute on, these two big pieces. So the capacity piece, I think, even through this study, when you ask leadership, what is social impact? They would say things like empowerment, long term change, systems change. When you look at management, it then becomes a little more tapered down. And then, management is talking more about program design, reach, looking at how many people were reached, what was the quality of delivery. And then if you go back down to implementation teams, it's all about, the project, like I need to, do this with certain people. So there's a very big disconnect in how everyone articulates impact. And on the funding piece, and I've said this in a lot of other sessions, many, if we have money, we will do monitoring and evaluation. But that's a huge miss. MNE should be part of your organization, right? So I think this creating funding is how you then design your program to ensure you have that resource allocation. And that's a big barrier currently in the space. And lastly is operational barriers, right? So how do you collect data? How do you use technology? Are still people using paper and pen? How real time is it? How are you analyzing the data? How are you using the data? So these are all the operational and sort of, logistical barriers that we found, and there's a lot more detail and depth to these pieces. But like I said, we're all about solutions, ideas, and moving forward. So, this is what we want all of you to take away from this and want to have a lot more discussion on these aspects. So, to solve for these problems. So, one is, of course, not just relying on a quantitative survey and on outputs as to how many people you reached, but actually incorporating into your work mixed methods, participatory methods, number one. Number two, actually trying to address, like I just explained, capacity. So you don't need everybody to be experts with, building dashboards or experts to be collecting data. But how do you find those champions in your organization to then, build their capacity to do appropriate MEL? And then, of course, funding shortages. How do you address that? How do you build it into your programs? That's number two. So, kind of finding solutions to address capacity and funding shortages. And lastly, I mean, for all of you who've been attending sessions, very important, right? It's not about saying, I need a report from you every 6 months. No, I need real time data. I need to streamline my data management systems using simple technologies, simple tools, so that it's not an afterthought. I've done my program now. Let me see what happened. But it's more like I'm doing my program and let me learn with the data I collect in real time. So these are our solutions. Um, I think also there's a lot of depth, and this is again a snapshot from the report on, how do you kind of work with your funders to create more sort of collaborative relationships as against, getting the grant and then just sending reports every 3 months or 6 months. So there's a lot of inputs and insight on how you could do that. Also a lot on, how do you approach your organization or MEL from a learning based lens. How do you move from, this narrow output focus to holistic systems change? So these are the different aspects that are catered to in the report. So I'm not going to spend too much time. The idea is to get you all excited about this content and have you read that and talk to us about it. However, I do want to end my quick, I hope it was quick and not too much of a monologue, with some things that, really all of you should take back to your organizations. And I would love to hear which of these are feasible and which are not. But number one, really start thinking about this idea of, there's everyone from the CEO and leadership to people who are on ground, have their heart, heads, mind on the field. Do they all share the same language of change? And are they all able to understand, how to manage and measure social impact? Two is really work with your donors, really try and bring your voice out, that the change you desire or the change we desire is not going to be possible in a 3 month or 6 month timeline. We need patient capital. We need to have a little bit more experimental, flexible approach for long term impact. Three, don't collect data just for reports. Collect data to really answer questions of what's working, what's not working, what to do next. And I always tell, my peers in the sector, when you're looking at an indicator, ask two questions. Can I make this change possible because of my program? And when I get data on that indicator, can I make a decision? I'm going to share. It's really worth this example, so I'm going to share this again. If you are looking at menstruation education for girls, and in one of my projects, we put in an indicator which said girls have a safe space to, change their sanitary pads. And, we kept collecting data. So my question was, the two ways I looked at that indicator. Number one, is my program looking at creating spaces, hygienic wash infrastructure? No. Can, by saying 30% do not have access to these spaces, can I actually do something about it? No. So, really trying to leverage creating indicators to then creating some insights from that. Number four is stakeholder collaboration. A lot of times we sit with our teams and make these theory of change, or we talk about impacts. We only talk to our participants, or beneficiaries. But actually going to, government officials who you partner with, other organizations who are working on similar themes and problems, I think is very important when we start thinking about the systemic change and lens. Also, I mean, it kind of links back to, this whole idea of advocating for long-term impact, but then also these, okay, I will, like, once my program is over, I will go and do a retrospective evaluation. It's so difficult to talk about the change if you know how far you've come if you don't know where you started. So building in baselines, building in, regular check-ins, so important. And these are the things that we have a responsibility to communicate to our partners, to our donors, to everybody we work with. One thing that again was very interesting, for us, to look at, is how SPOs are looking at change at three levels. So one, if they are working on, the example I gave of building, micro enterprises with women, uh, they will look at one, personal empowerment, like what happened, what knowledge and skills were built for those women, how did that business, that small scale enterprise, impact at the community level, and then with these different, micro enterprises, how did it actually strengthen, the community or the system as a whole. So I think that was very interesting for us, and again, lots of examples on how this was done by SPOs in the report. And finally, and thank you for being patient and listening to me, but finally, this whole shift in mindset, that it is not a proving game. It is about, MEL is about improving. And it's about not compliance, but it's about accountability and learning. So I think that's all from my side. I'd like to bring in Trisha here. Please, if any of you have any sort of thoughts, suggestions, anything that comes to mind, please use the chat box. But yes, Trisha, I think my voice needs to stop now. But what were your takeaways from this report? What do you allude to? What's your big takeaway?
You've obviously covered it, Sharon, but I remember in the probably in the first 6 months or so of this work, and when we were having constant discussions on what's emerging, I think the first piece that you talked about, which surprised you as well, that's the part that I think I still kind of stay with, and I was reading the report yesterday as well. Um, how SPOs look at social impact, and the fact that irrespective of which thematic areas they are operating in, what kind of SPOs they are, how old they are. And if you remember, we had really wanted to get into this typology and say, no, different SPOs may be looking at different things. And we were like, no, it doesn't look that way. And that I thought was, really, it was very insightful for me. It was a big aha moment for me that irrespective of where the SPO comes from, they have a similar outlook on what impact is. Looking at systemic change, embedding practices in state systems, or engaging with leadership, or having government buy-in, how they look at women empowerment, right? So it goes beyond just income to decision-making and agency, or women in leadership roles, changing gender norms, or community empowerment and resilience, access to government benefits, or community leadership, or behavioral changes. it was amazing that these were so similar across all of the different SBOs. And it was also amazing that these are all such long-term, um, KPIs or indicators or changes, if you will. But even though we were talking about impact assessment, and there is this notion about impact and change and whatever, the way we look at it being very short term, but the way SPOs were looking at it was very long term, and also the fact that this was consistent across levels in the organization, right? So I think that was for me like biggest aha. Second one would be, and I love, there was a quote that you had there, which I've kind of written down for myself. Essentially, it's about not making MEL complex. And I know even we as an organization, I mean, we constantly having conversations around this. And we've just gone through the end of last year. So we've been into donor reporting, assessing for ourselves the work that we are doing, what's the impact that we are having. And it's just so easy to make MEL complex. And the quote that you had said that essentially it talked about MEL is not about measuring the phenomenon of change, right? But it's about measuring the indicators that give us the confidence that that change will happen. And it has such deep implications. It has implications on, do we really understand what our change process is? Are we consistent in our understanding of change process? Are we able to communicate that well? Is that truly reflected in the work that we are doing and how we do it? So that was a big aha for me as well. And a third one, I think, would be that, despite the fact that there are so many different organizations who are kind of studying this phenomenon, let's say, there is a sense that there is a lack of an ecosystem enabler, someone who kind of brings it all together, brings funders and organizations together, who can support the ecosystem in addressing challenges and barriers. So the fact that there is that sense of something missing, I think, was also quite an insightful one for me.
Thank you, Trisha. And thank you for using the chat box, Trisha. I think there's so much there. But overall, when I'm looking at that as well, I think we all agree, there's probably no disagree in the room. So that's good. And please, the ones who disagree, would love to hear your piece, make us stronger. But I think also I threw to the room a lot of things to do. And when you think about resource, time, all of that, everyone's going to be like, Sharon, too much. So I think, Trisha, why don't you bring us all to ground? What should we prioritize? Where do you think there is most value for organizations of different sizes and nature to look at? And what's your short list?
I was just looking at the chat, and there's just the last chat, I think, that I can see something that they're saying, which kind of really resonates with me as well. I think it's the last point that I was just mentioning, which is, what is our understanding of the change process? Have we built that understanding of the change process? And I'll give you an example that we struggle with. We are an academic institution. We create knowledge. It's a very esoteric field that we are in. Now, how do we talk about what's the impact of knowledge in real practice, behavior change, attitude change? Right? And it's a question that not only are we, kind of being asked by donors and, the entire ecosystem, but very often we end up asking ourselves that question. What is the change that we are truly creating? And sometimes I feel that while that there is an understanding of the change, in the sense that we are, let's say, in research and knowledge creation because obviously we believe in it, but have we really articulated it for ourselves? Have we built that as a common understanding across the organization, across the teams, across levels? Is it visible and tangible in my day-to-day work? Are we all advocates of that change process? Are we all able to speak the same language within the organization? And then, of course, then we come to the second part of it, which is the methodological challenge, right? That even if I've articulated that, am I able to find an indicator or, create an indicator that allows me to understand with confidence that this change is going to happen because this is what the change process looks like. And then other things like contribution and attribution and all of that. But to me, that is secondary still. The primary is really, do we have that understanding and do we genuinely believe in it? Do we have that confidence? So I think that is a big one. And from the study, even for us, that's a big one, for us to reflect for ourselves in the work that we do. The second one then I would say is, are we then able to bring on partners, funders as partners and contributors, to this understanding? So do they have a similar understanding and buy-in into the process of change, into the theory of change, how impact is created? And then are we able to co-create indicators? And honestly, I mean, I think that this word, co-create is just so often used, but we don't know what it really means. We talk about co-creation, but what is really co-creation? Most of the times it's somebody either telling us something, this is what it should be, and we're looking at it and saying, yes, we can tick it off and say we can do these 18, but not the other 20 or whatever. Or us saying it to someone else, right? That this is, but what does co-creation really mean? Are we able to treat the collaborators that we work with as genuine collaborators and partners, and think about what's the area that we are in, what's the impact that we want to drive, and therefore what is an indicator that is unique to us, possibly, unique to what you want, what we are looking at. Are we able to come to some kind of an understanding on that? I think those are two those are two areas that I would really call out. And obviously this depends on who is the stakeholder and where they are situated. But I think that these are also common across all stakeholder groups. I mean, within an organization as well, and then outside as collaborators for the SPO. I think these are probably common across all.
Sure. Thank you. And I think just to build on your point of, the shared understanding. So a lot of what, a lot of examples I've seen with, certain teams, like if you're looking at a simple, youth skilling program, even within the implementation teams, if you ask them what's the change you want to create, someone will say confidence, someone will say communication, someone will say job, someone will say income. How do you bring that all together? And then, leadership will talk a completely different language. And so a lot of the work we do as well is not saying, let's just build a theory of change and we'll tell you how it's done. It's about bringing these different voices together. And that has a lot of power, to kind of have a shared understanding on that. And I think, Trisha, we are going to be asked a lot of questions on how do you get donors to co-create. So maybe we'll pick that up after this. But I think a good segue into all of this and what you've spoken about is also the work SIFC does. So if you want to, yes, just, shed some light on what that looks like and how do you all solve for these, big pieces?
Yeah. Actually addressing both of the things, Sharon, that you just brought up, right? Which is, how do you get funders to co-create? And the other one was that, how do you get that common understanding of what impact is and what those indicators are, even without the funders, in the picture? And that's something that we have over the period of this work realized as a challenge. So the role of SIFC from here on, is firstly, we want to be able to address that gap that we see, which is of an ecosystem enabler. And in the next stage of this work, there are three things that we want to focus on. One is, how do we create learning assets that are relevant, useful for the ecosystem? They're contextual and can be used by a diverse set of stakeholders. How do we bring together communities of practice and shape the thinking on what is impact and what are indicators? And this is a really crucial one. In fact, we've just had an experience with this. We've been working on understanding what is the impact of an organization on rural development when it's been in that space for 15, 20 years. So it's going beyond programmatic impact, but organizational impact. And we realized that it's really important to bring in stakeholders, not just from within the organization, but from outside the organization as well. Experts, people who've been in that space, funders, to talk about when rural development happens, 15, 20 years down the line. How do we know that rural development has happened? What are those? And can we come to a common set of common understanding? And this is not indicators, it's just understanding, just in simple English, simple words, what is that change? So that bringing communities of practice in order to come to that understanding, I think, is very critical. And then co-creating practical solutions, together with those communities of practice, with the learning assets that we develop. The thinking is that these will help unpack, specific parts of that MEL puzzle and then put them together in a comprehensive impact assessment framework. In fact, when we started this work, we thought that ultimately the need was to create a new development management inspired impact assessment framework. But I think the work has made us realize that there are many frameworks, they are being used, and they can all be very successful, in their usage. It's really the lens that you bring to the framework rather than the framework itself, right? So it's the approach. And I think we are also shifting our thinking from saying that we want to talk about a framework to saying that here is an approach which can then be used for, multiple frameworks, multiple thematic areas, an approach which is tailored to India's development context. It's an adaptable framework to multiple contexts. And most important is that it is co-created together with practitioners from diverse settings, right? So it's not something that we are creating in an academic setting and then, taking out to the world. So ultimately creating a distinct perspective that is rooted in development management principles. That's the net objective, I think, of where we can imagine taking all of this. As an add-on to that, what we also then want to do is work on different theme-based components, again, engaging with practitioners who find this relevant for their work. And I know that the team's going to ask me this. I believe that on chat, there would have been shared an interest form. And if not, then please do share that interest form. And please do fill out that interest form, because we would love to reach out to you to engage you on this journey together, shaping those communities of practice, understanding, what are the areas that are useful for you, relevant for you, so that the work that we do then is much more focused, relevant, impactful for everyone. So please do fill out that interest form.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Trisha. I think, yes, all of what you said, I definitely resonate with. And I guess that's why it's 1++ years that we've been talking and deliberating together. But I'd like to open the floor up, or I don't know, the chat box up. I know there are lots of questions, but I'd like to get some context to these questions. So I will just I do see Stella George. I think you have a lot of very interesting questions, but would like you to come in. Stella, you want to talk about your questions, bring some
Sure.
perspective?
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for this. And I think this is a very interesting report. And I've just started looking at it. So it'll take some time to get more context and understand the process. But yeah, a couple of things I wanted to understand was when you were interacting with these organizations and trying to understand how they understand impact, how do most implementing organizations try and strike a balance between how the donor defines impact and how the community looks at it? Because often, I mean, at least in my experience, a lot of times um, the organization would not really try and break down and understand the indicator, or for that matter, even identify or create the right indicator. It's more like if the donor wants us to do this, then we will do it, irrespective of whether or not it makes the most sense. So yeah, I just want to get a sense of that. And when we want these organizations to sort of build in their capacities to monitor data regularly, find easy tools for doing so, because mm, mm, I mean, I think mostly it is a retrospective exercise, and I maybe it's a capacity issue, perhaps it's maybe it's also finance, or it could be a combination of all of this, and it is a complex process. So is there like a simpler way of um, you know, reducing the complexity and improving the system as a whole in terms of managing data, recording it regularly, and building those capacities to do so? So just these two questions, if that makes sense.
Sure. I can take the first one, Trisha, in terms of, yeah, and then maybe the complexity piece. But yeah, I think Stella, one is I don't think organizations are to be, give an answer. I don't think organizations are able to bring this balance or navigate. Right
Mhm.
now, I believe, and this is a personal sort of viewpoint, that it is very donor driven. But
Right.
and probably this will also answer your second question on the how do you build it in. I think there is a mindset shift required. So only
Mhm.
when we as organized NPOs or SPOs understand that this is not how it should be, challenge the status quo, that
Right.
I I have to take a step back. I have to be more, kind of also explaining to the donor why this doesn't make sense, for which I need this back work done, right? I need there to be clarity within my teams. I need to be some structured thinking process of what I want to measure. Because if I don't know what I want to measure, then it's very easy to follow what the donor wants me to do.
Mhm.
So
Right. Correct.
and that's also another attitude shift as to, why retrospective. It's because we are looking at it as compliance. We are not looking at it as something that is embedded in our DNA that we need. So I think all of this is also linked to how we as organizations, as SPOs, need to start thinking a little differently. And then I feel things fall into place. Then, you'll say, okay, if I need to convince the donor, what do I need to have? If I need to talk to my
Mm.
donor about this, what do I need to have? So that's my kind of really quick response to this. But yes, Trisha, over to you.
No, Sharon, I mean, completely in agreement with you. I think that's really the biggest, elephant in the room. The biggest thing to be worked on is getting the donors to be on board onto this process. Uh, the good thing is, I think that there are two things that are happening. One is that donors are increasingly open to looking at evidence and data, and I'm not talking about what is the process of change, but evidence and data on, what do people think about change, how they think about change. The fact that, SPOs are struggling with conveying to donors, what change is, how they think about it, how they want to drive it. I think a lot of this kind of work that happens, we are hoping allows you to start opening doors, with donors in terms of their mindset, saying that, listen, there are these challenges that it's not just me, but the entire ecosystem is facing. And if you think about it, there's a lot of work that is happening in different fields, which kind of converges into this, that donors also need to start listening to what's happening, with the SPOs on the ground. So I think that's
True.
one, that they are much more open to listening to, evidence and data. And the second is that there are increasingly a lot of organizations who are either using or leveraging some of this knowledge, or are able to create their own narratives to go out and talk to donors and say, listen, this is how I'm thinking about it. Now I have the language where I can talk to you. I understand where you're coming from, but this is where I'm coming from. And I'm able to have that conversation with you. Still, I know that it's still in very nascent stages, I would say, and that's one of the big things that for SIPSI we wanted to really work on, which is, now how do we create those spaces for donors and implementing organizations to come together? How do we create that common language, that both sides understand? How do we bring in intermediaries who have the understanding of the donor perspective and the understanding of the SPO perspective? How do we bring them in, empower them to be able to kind of bring both sides together? So that's, some work that we are doing, but we do know that this shift or this trend, has started, and I hope that we are able to catalyze or accelerate this trend.
Thanks, Trisha. And I think, yes, Mani Chidambaran, sorry, I'm very sorry. But
Yeah,
Mani, I can call you that. I would love to hear your perspective.
yeah, you can call me Chidam. I'm from Dalian Foundation.
All right.
Actually, it was great to be part of this discussion, to listen that, there was a lot of concern about the donors' alignment onto this. And to be honest, at least, thanks for, Trisha was mentioning that there are some donor was, coming forward. And we are the one of the donors, and really trying to co-create, for a long-term impact with our partners. To be honest, I wanted to really share the experience. I also wanted to listen from Sharon, your experience on the study, because though we really provide a fund for M&E, not just for only our program, for the entire organization. We provide the many team, not just one person. We tried up to funding for three person, try to provide a technology support where it's required. But and we also try to work with them to create an impact, tracking, system, the whole system where what you're talking about, not just only looking at, programs, how many activities conducted and this and that, but we actually worked with a log frame and try to set the whole, long-term impact, indicators to be seeing. We also, when we create, we also know that in 3 years program, looking at impact, particularly, empower impact is not possible. We also try to work with the partners of our 2 cycle and 3 cycle to see the real impact of what is being put out on the log frame. But it is, our experience, it is more that, people, not really organization coming forward to utilize this opportunity. More they see it as a reluctant and hesitate to enter into this space of co-creation. And I would like to listen from you, why that reluctance from the partners. So one, that we could sense that, yes, of course, the capacity, this and that is a limitation that you pointed out from your study. But we also see a kind of negative, the fear creating among them, because if you try to look out and create, long-term impact track, and then negative things comes out from the field as well, which they don't want to expose to the donor, which they feel that it is a kind of no relationship, breakup would happen if we share negative things what's coming out from the field. So I think that, we don't know how to really, how much we space and flexibility we give, and that fear, removing that fear, it is impossible for us. So what is your experience? Have you heard anything from the field when you had the study? So apart from other barrier that you put out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And, there should be soon, there should be a time when we have more, donor participation. So thank you very much for, outlining the different things you as a donor have done. And I think for all the donors and all the people who are more on that side, I think there's lots to learn on that. But thank you very much. To answer your question, and Trisha, I'll hand over to you in just a second. But I think the whole hesitation comes from two things, and again, this is all personal, from my experience that I've seen. One is this trust, you know trust that we are here to work together, and the relationship that we have with donors, as against this hierarchy, right, that I'm going to work for you or with your money. So I think this trust building exercise has a lot to do with this hesitance or reluctance, and that hierarchy, that which has been there for generations, like it's just part of how we think of aid and all of that. So one is the trust, and two is capacity, because if you tell someone, hey, go and run a cycle 2 kilometers, but if they don't know how to cycle, even if you give them the freedom to do that for 2 kilometers, it's not possible. So I think trust and capacity are two reasons that probably SPOs also find it difficult to take and run with it. And I think someone had written in the group, right? For organizations who've been doing this for a long period of time, it becomes easy. For those guys who are just stepping into the space, it's very overwhelming. It's very, it's very new. And then there's this whole mindset. If there's no trust, there's this mindset of, I can't talk about stuff that didn't go right. Let me just cover up, because they are thinking of it as I will come and judge you, rather than let's work together and solve problems. So I think those are my 2 cents on that. But Trisha.
Yeah. I think I was just thinking it's linked to trust, I guess, but it's that L part of MEAL, right? That we kind of forget that exists, and it exists for a reason. And that's, everyone signed on to it. So, I mean, it's not just the implementing organization, but even the funders and the intermediate, and everybody in the ecosystem has signed on to the fact that this is MEAL. And learning is a very key part of the process. And I completely get it. I mean, it is very difficult. I don't think that there is yet openness. There could be a lot of lip service to the L part of it, and maybe not enough genuine intent. Again, I think it's a movement, and hopefully that movement is happening. But I think as either funders or donors ourselves or as implementing organizations ourselves, I think there has to be an increased focus on the fact that we are also learning on this process. Funders are again becoming open to the fact that they are learning, how to fund, what to fund, where to fund. And implementing organizations are also learning, how we do what we do. And to make the L part of it a critical, part of the journey. It's not something which comes at the end of 3 years or whatever, but it's part of the journey on how we are learning, and we are, making those constant, let's say, enhancements, improvements, whatever. We are kind of tweaking the program accordingly. As I said, no easy answers really, but I think that's definitely one of the areas that we all need to be working more towards.
Thank you. I think we're on time, and but please don't think of this as the end. We're right here in the space, in the sector, happy to connect and talk to each one of you. We will send out an email with the form, the interest form. Really important for us to really get everyone together on this on this journey together. I'd like to end with one sort of thought for SPOs. If tomorrow all your donors tell you, we have no ask of you, collect what you want, give us reports that you want, or give us data that you think will tell a good story, are you there yet? Can you portray, can you work without donor? And then it's fair to say, let's talk to donors and tell them to shift their support or how they look at us. So that's my thought for SPOs. For the donors who are here, I think you all bring life to what we do. However, can we tell a better story of that light we bring as against just the numbers? So, and what can we do for that? I think those are just two things I want to leave this amazing group with. We still have 160 people here, so I take that as people being interested and part of these dialogues. So with that, I'd like to thank Trisha very, very much, and of course the whole ISDM SIFC team and my dearest fourth wheel team for just being with us all the time and making this possible. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you, everyone.